Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm just stunned by how many people are interested in hydrangeas, and I think that speaks to the fact of how the interests that we have. And they can be a little bit confusing, so that's why I named this Demystifying Hydrangeas. Once you get the drift of all the different kinds and how they bloom, where things like that, it's very straightforward. First of all, I would like to give credit, very much credit, to Eric Barrett. He is one of our instructors from Ohio State. He's also the A&R director in, I think it's Mahoning County. And he has really had an extensive study of hydrangeas. Okay, what I hope to achieve today is share with you the types of hydrangeas. There's different classes of hydrangeas. And what we will be talking about throughout this presentation is the concept old wood, new wood. And I'll get to that and define that in just a moment. I hope to help you be able to identify different types of hydrangeas by either when they're flowering or even when they're coming out of the ground, their leaf structure. There's all kinds of ways you can help identify what class of hydrangeas you have. And then, of course, we're going to get into pruning. Okay? I think with this large of a crowd, if you wouldn't mind, hold your questions to the end. I'll be very glad to answer any and all questions. I don't guarantee I'll have the correct answer, but I'll try. And I will certainly tell you if I don't know how to answer your question. Okay, let's get into some real basics just to start out with. This basically applies to all your garden, no matter whether it's a vegetable garden, a cutting garden, or whatever, or landscape garden. We need to know what kind of soil we have. Now, most of you well, you're in Minner, maybe many of you from Minner, so you may have the sandy soil, depending on how near the lake you live. Other parts of the county tend to have more clay. Anyway, you need to just understand, and there's all kinds of literature, there's ways to evaluate your soil, just basically picking it up and feeling it and things like that. But then the next thing, we do recommend that you do a soil test. One of the really important things about siting your hydrangeas is knowing what kind of light you have, what light conditions. And you need to take a little bit of time throughout the day and kind of go outside in the morning and say, okay, this area's in the sun, this is in the shade, particularly if you've got a lot of trees. Go out at noontime and see where the sun is, so on and so forth, because that will be very important. It's always important, no matter what kind of plant you're trying to grow. And you do good soil preparation for your beds. I'm not going to go into that today. We have presentations on that and things like that. So let's talk about soil test. This tells you the pH of your soil, which is the acidity or basicness of the soil. I was a chemist by training, so I could go on and on about pH. But what you need to know is what type of adjustments or additives do I need to make to my soil to make it appropriate for the kind of plant that I'm trying to grow. Now, for instance, if you're trying to grow a lawn, you want your pH to be above 7. If you're doing most other things, and in some cases, depending on what you're trying to grow, you want it below 7, slightly below 7 usually, and then quite a bit more so if you're trying to grow blueberries and things like that. What is so important, no matter what you're planting, is make sure you put whatever you plant you're working with in the right place. What that means, you'll learn the growing conditions, how big the plant gets, what kind of sun it wants, blah, 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 all the different things. And you make sure you're putting it there. Now, a number of years, 25, 26 years ago, my late husband and I built our house. So, I had this blank slate. I wasn't a master gardener at that time. And let me tell you the number of mistakes I made. I would go to the nursery and say, oh, I love that plant. Oh, where can I put it? Oh, I'll put it here. And soon learned that, no, that was not right. But anyway, make sure your plant growing conditions, optimum growing conditions, match the space that you're trying to put it in. So how do I know the properties of my plant? Well, fortunately, most vendors have very significant tags with your plant. Sometimes you buy a plant and you think that's what you're buying, but it has, somehow the tag has gotten mixed up. But most generally, they're very good. Now notice it tells you what kind of temperatures it can do, what kind of sunlight. This one even tells you how to plant it and things like that. So there's all kinds of information on that tag. And if there isn't a tag in the plant that you're looking at, I would go ask the supplier, hey, where can I find the information about how to grow this plant? Okay, so we got the basics here. Know your sunshine, and know your growing conditions, know the characteristics of plant, and match those. In general, and this is a very general statement for all hydrangeas, they like moist, well-drained soil, high hydro, water, moist, so that matches. They like part sun to part shade. Depending on the type, there can be some that grow better in the more sun and some that grow better in more shade. So the ideal is if you have that situation where you can plant your hydrangeas where you have morning sun, and in the afternoon it's protected from that strong sun, particularly late in the afternoon. So east side's a good side to plant your hydrangeas. Okay, now this is just some general speaking types of hydrangeas. These are words that you will hear often when and you see them on the plant tags in some cases. We have smooth leaf hydrangeas, we have big leaf hydrangeas, we have oak leaf hydrangeas. Guess what the oak leaf hydrangea leaf looks like? Okay. We have climbing hydrangeas, and we have the panicle hydrangeas. Panicle meaning something cone-like. So we'll look at some samples in just a moment. Now we'll get to old wood, new wood. Old wood is wood on your plant that was there previous years. New wood is sprouts that come up each year. Perennials, most perennials, they die down every year, so you have new growth every year. With hydrangeas, it's a little dicier with shrubs because many shrubs, including some hydrangeas, bloom on old wood. So if you go out in the fall and clear cut all your hydrangeas, and it happens to be a couple of the different varieties, you're not going to have any blooms next year. Just like if you prune your forsythia late in the fall, you're going to prune off a lot of blooms, lose a lot of blooms. Lilacs, number of different things. Okay, so new wood, of course, is what's growing this year. Now, the canes or stems from the old wood are also growing too. They're putting out leaves and everything. But so after the bush is real full and green like they are now, it's really hard to tell what's old wood and new wood. But we'll try to help you with that in a little bit. Okay, another classification that you will hear when people are talking about, they call them mop heads. Mop head, lace cap. Those are two kinds of mop heads. I have those down here. We have panicle, again, the more cone-like. Now, not all panicles are going to be that obviously cone-like, but some of them are fuller, and so they're kind of a rounded cone. But they are wider at the bottom than they are at the top. And here's just a couple of examples. Okay, so now let's get into the real stuff. This is the smooth leaf hydrangeas. They're large ball shaped. See, no pointiness. The leaves, the texture of the leaf is smoother. It still has texture, but it's smoother than some of the others. So, and it blooms early, and it blooms on new wood. And most of them, they get to be about 3 to 5 feet tall. So the smooth leaf, the big leaf, and the oak leaf all tend to bloom about the same time, but they're the first ones that are going to bloom. The panicles will bloom later. Okay? So these are stunning this year. I don't know, I guess we just had the right amount. We've had quite a bit of rain throughout the spring, except for those 3 weeks when it was dry. And they just are huge this year. And we'll talk about pruning those in a little bit. The macrophylla are what are often called the big leaf. This is not even one of the big kinds. This is the very old-fashioned Annabelle, and it's just outdone itself this year. And when it blooms initially, it's white, very white, and then it will age to this more chartreuse kind of color. A lot of people collect these and do these in different dried fruit arrangements and wreaths and things like that. To keep it, to make sure that it stays green like this and doesn't just go directly to brown, you need to make sure it's continuing to get enough water. Because if you don't, if it gets late in the summer and it gets drier, then they'll start turning to brown. Or, if you want to use these for flower arranging or whatever, make sure you cut them when they're like this. Okay? Okay, these are the big leaves. See, they have a lot more texture to their leaf, front and back. The big thing about these, you can adjust the color mostly if you're more acidic, you're going to get blue. Less acidic, you're going to get more pink. Now, not absolutely every cultivar can be changed, because most of them, some of them just aren't that sensitive. They're bred to be pink. So. But generally they have quite large heads, very full, flowers. Actually, the flowers on these are what's called immature or not incomplete flowers. They are not the flowers that have the sexual organs that allow them to reproduce. There are actually some way down in here, but you don't really see them, okay? They tend to bloom in the middle to late June, and they continue to bloom particularly if they are a reblooming variety. In the 1990s, Dr. Michael Durr introduced the reblooming big leaf hydrangea, and that's what's really fueled the explosion of utilizing these hydrangeas. They do bloom on new wood. They also bloom on old wood. So that when you first get the first blooms, that's buds that were formed last year. And so those are the early ones. Sometimes they're the bigger ones that you will see. Then later on, as the shoots that are new this year, they will set buds. And so you tend to have these to continue to bloom throughout the season. So this is one of the ones that most people have the most trouble with pruning. Because if you prune too much down to the ground, you're not going to get your initial buds. So now this year, we don't have a lot on them because we had that nasty weather in December, and then we had a late frost. So they are sensitive to frost, and particularly if we have one of these years where you get beautiful outside, you go out and you clean off your garden, clean all of the litter up, make it look all nice and pretty, put down your mulch and things like that. And then we have a few days of frost. Well, the plants are already stimulated to grow. So, and if it gets too cold, it gets below 30, usually it will do a number on some of those plants. So anyway, we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about how to prune these in a little bit. I just want to get through the types right now. But big thing to remember, blooms on old wood and new wood if you have a reblooming variety, which most of the ones that you can buy now are. But I had, when I first started putting in hydrangeas, I wanted the Nico Blue. That is the quintessential blue. And it's a gorgeous bloom, but it is very sensitive to temperature. So I had this lush plant every year, taking up more and more room in my garden. And where are the buds? Where are the blooms? And so eventually I just said, hey, if you're not going to produce around here, you're out of here. So I dug it up and put something else there. But anyway, so if you have a Nico Blue and you get it to bloom, I give you congratulations. That's all I can say, because most of us don't. You may have one bloom, but you're looking for multiple blooms. So anyway, okay. So let's go to the next type. This is the oak leaf. Well, I like all hydrangeas, but this I really, really like. This is most of the buds on the blooms on the oak leaf look like this now, are turning to this color. It started blooming towards the end of June, and throughout July it's beginning to turn like this. This is what it looks like when it first comes out. This was a bud I happened to find last night that was down below and just for whatever reason hadn't bloomed out yet. So the oak leaf hydrangea is so cool because you have it blooms very prolifically, and then you have this lovely gradual change to a rust color. It's going to be rust color at the end. Now this is the oak leaf on the corner of my house. That picture at the top was taken back when it was all white, first started blooming. The one in the middle I took just a couple of days ago, and the one in the bottom is in the fall. It has the leaves turn very nice color too. So it really, and then to treat on top of all of that, this is truly an all-season interest kind of thing. The bark is exfoliating. So, it's just really performs throughout the year. Okay? They can get quite large. They do have the cone or the panicle type design or arrangement. This one I just discovered this year, and this is becoming one of my all-time favorites. You'll hear me say that a lot. This is often referred to as a mountain hydrangea. That's a common name. It's serrata is the Latin name that goes with that. It has a lace cap. I really am not a big lace cap. I prefer the more showy things. Some people, there's beautiful, beautiful lace caps. But this thing was just absolutely covered with blooms. Now they're faded out. I didn't bring a branch because they are fading and such. And it's also nice because it's only gets to be at 2 to 3 feet tall, and it is more hardy than a typical big leaf hydrangea. The big leaf and the serrata are very, 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 very close cousins, but they do put a separate class for that. And I just look at that. I like the size because they don't get real large, like some of the other, particularly the paniculatus, get very large. Speaking of which, these are blooming now, and they are having a spectacular year. You drive around and you see paniculatas, bushes. A lot of people do these in tree form. They do come up from a single stem, so you can train it to be a tree. They're just marvelous. This is see, it's just coming out. It still hasn't even flowered out at the top. This happens to be one of the big ones. This is called Phantom. I don't know how easy that is to find in the trade. I got this through the Arboretum at one point. So, but look how this bloom will get to be about this tall, and it's very, very fluffy. Now, this one over here down at the bottom, that one's been blooming for about a month now. That is a quick fire, and you see it's a much more open, and it's not nearly this big. But the ones that are many of the ones that are out in full and are real pointy are the quick fire. That's a very popular. hydrangea. See how this one has the showy flowers, a few of the showy flowers, but it has a lot of the fertile flowers too. So just, an FYI kind of thing. So anyway, okay. Oh, there's one more. The climbing hydrangea. This is pictures from out in the Arboretum. This happens to have been on a tree, that the tree has died, but the hydrangea is still blooming. These are very interesting. They do climb. If you have a climbing hydrangea, they are quite vigorous growers. Once they get growing, they're very slow to establish. Then once they get going, they can really grow. And so you need a pretty sturdy object for them to grow on. A pretty strong arbor or whatever. So that you can see at the bottom there, this is out in one of the trails a little ways from the visitor center. It's a viney thing, so it's kind of going along the ground. And usually once you get these started, they'll vine down on the ground. So if you don't want them, you have to make sure you just keep cutting them off, pulling them up, whatever. Okay, but look how tall they can get. They're huge. And of course, it's a little hard to prune something that's 60 foot tall. So you want to do the pruning earlier before it gets to be that size. Okay, so how can I determine the type of hydrangea I have? Obviously, if it's blooming, they're much easier to identify when it's blooming. But perhaps you've moved into a house that's new to you, but it's got an established garden. There's clues that you can, if you know what to look for, then you could determine ahead of time before you start pruning what kind of hydrangea you do have. Okay, so let's get into how to do that. You can examine the root structure. The big leaf and the smooth hydrangeas have a clump of shoots from where they were, from the way the roots or the shoots grow. So then the panicle has more of a single root coming up, or stalk coming up. So this picture is not real clear. This is the one that has multiple stems. It's hard to tell because everything's brown. This one is one that kind of comes up from a single root. So this one would be a big leaf hydrangea. This is the one of the paniculata hydrangeas. So this one happens to be a clump of, this has been there a long, long time. And I planted one plant and you see there's still multiple stems. Yeah. So that's the easiest way to help understand whether you have a paniculata. Of course, if you oak leaf, you determine it by the leaf. Again, the smooth leaf blooms on old, new wood. The macrophilia blooms on old and new wood, and the paniculatas bloom on new wood. Okay? So we got to keep that in mind. So you can also kind of tell from the leaf. This is just an example of the different ones that I have in my yard. We have the smooth leaf over here to the left. The big leaves, that's hence it's bigger. The paniculatas have this more elongated leaf, not nearly as fat at the bottom as the other. The mountain serrata has it's still not as big as the big leaf because it's just not as big a plant, the nature of the plant. And then, of course, we have the oak leaf. Okay? So there's two ways you can tell. Well, three ways you can tell, really, because looking at the bloom is, of course, the most important thing. Anyway, so, okay, so hopefully now that you know what kind you have, or what kinds you have, if you have multiple ones, now let's get into the nitty-gritty of pruning, because this is where things get a little more intense. I'll start with the arborensis, or the smooth leaf. Basically, cut all the stems down to about 6 inches. Now, I do all my pruning in the springtime because then I have a better idea of new wood and old wood and things like that. But you can cut these all the way down, and literally that's exactly what I do. You might want to thin the shoots, rather than leave all of those little stems growing. I'd cut out about half of them. That will ensure, that helps you get these bigger blooms. If you leave them all, they'll probably be somewhat smaller because they're all too many competing for the nutrients. If you don't do any pruning, then it can keep growing. You still get new growth on the ends of the and everything. So it just helps keep it kind of a little more compact. Now, mine don't get a whole lot of sun. They do pretty well in some. They get some sun. They're certainly just not in direct sun or all day. So they get floppy, particularly if we have a lot of rain. Now what I do is I don't think you can see it there, but I have put a big fence around it. I use some green fencing wire that's about yay high, and you really can't see it once things start growing. And that'll help hold the things up. So because if we get a big rain, they'll just flop right down the ground, and they won't generally stand up again. Okay, now this is the macrophilia. See right here, you got multiple stems. This is actually after I'd pruned, but I happen to have two right next to one another, and that's what I was hoping was going to be all bloomed out, and I would have you the before and the after in the actual picture, but well, life didn't turn out quite that way. But what you want to do, first of all, you remove the old wood because they will get very woody in the middle. And that old wood just takes up space, so the shoots that are trying to come up aren't going to, are just crowded. So try to remove all of the dead wood. Then you prune the stems back, starting at the ground, count up 1, 2, 3, and then prune right above that. And that will help control the size too. Like I said, I do in the spring. I do my pruning in the spring, so you can tell if there's a little bit of a shoot there. Now this year, when you went out to prune your trees, or prune these in the spring, if you touched those buds, they were just powder. They were brown and they just powdered, they were not alive. But there were some small, depending upon how much protection you have, some of the sprouts on those old canes, the ones from last year, you could tell they're buds. So if you cut it off 1, 2, 3, then that's 3 potential stalks for blooms and everything. If you leave them and don't cut anymore, then the flowers get smaller and they perform better, okay? Then you also want to thin the canes, because if you don't thin the canes, because if you've got an old clump, it may be this big, and there may be 30 or 40 canes in that space. Got something like that. Well, each one of those is going to try to grow. They're all going to put out leaves, and there's just not going to be enough sunlight to get down to the leaves that need to photosynthesize and stuff. So it's always wise to prune out some of the canes. I was told to remove about 1/3 of the canes, something like that. Yeah, this is where I learned how to prune, because for those who knew Randy, he had me get down there and do that. No, don't just talk about it, okay? All right, so anyway, now the new wood, or the new shoots, they're just coming up. You can usually see, oh yeah, I've got some really new green shoots right among the different canes, the wooden-like canes. Now, if you do your pruning, and at the end, about the first week in May, and you still have some sticks sticking out, if you've done that, go ahead and prune those off, because they're not going to do anything. If they're going to push a flower, you're going to be seeing the growth before then. So, okay. The reason I was slow in pruning this year, because I wasn't sure about, how many of these things were going to be live, or, the canes were going to have viable buds on them. And it's, so if the buds are beginning to expand a little bit, you'll know whether they're live or they've been frosted. That's the one thing about hydrangeas. We all love these hydrangeas, and they always put 5, the growing zone that we are in, they put it on the tag. But if we have a really cold winter, or like we did at Christmas time, and the wind, that we had terrible winds and terrible, very, very cold temperatures. Hydrangeas are kind of, if you're really borderline, but if you do things right, you'll be successful. Look around, we have so many beautiful things blooming right now. Okay. Now this is the paniculata. Again, blooms on new wood. So you can prune whatever as much as you want. Paniculatas tend to get very large. If you don't prune, you'll have things that are up to 15 feet or more. So I prune to maintain this. If any of you used to listen to Angelo on pruning to the size of a beach ball, particularly with a tree. Now that happens not to be a tree. It's more of a shrub, so it's a little hard to envision that as a beach ball. But well, no, that one is a tree. I'm sorry, that one is a tree. That's not exactly shaped like a beach ball, but the whole idea, I really pruned it hard. Again, looking for indication of growth, prune right above the where you want. See how all of the canes, this is the before up here. See, those are all the stems from last year. And then some of the plant even still had some of the flowers, because I don't cut them off. I like more winter interest kind of thing. And see how bushy that is, how many canes there are, and how they're extended. Now here, I hacked them back significantly. There's my tree. Okay. See, that's how it started out. Lots of branches, lots of blooms, which was great. But if I leave all of those, then again, it gets too full in the middle, and you don't get as much sunlight down to where the leaves are growing. Okay? Now, moving on to the oak leaf, they do bloom on old wood. The best time to prune them is right if you want. It would break my heart to cut off all those blooms right now. So I don't prune them. They don't really need a whole lot of pruning, assuming you have the size, you have a space for them. They do get quite large. I think that's probably about 7 feet tall. So it's quite spacious, but it's around on the side of the house. So you would just prune back, cut those buds off if you really wanted to control size. And maybe sometime you have to get, say, okay, I'm just going to sacrifice it for a year, because if I cut all the buds off, then I'm not going to probably have anything next year. Okay? But it can help. Also, then you can also thin it out, or just control size. But really, don't take much pruning. They just kind of grow. And this, it's hard to tell in this picture, but this gives you an idea that it is this exfoliating bark. This back down here is kind of, you can see it. But this is the big question. Why are my microphyllis hydrangeas aren't blooming properly? Okay, number one, improper pruning. Okay, you get that's what we're trying to talk through. If you have them in too much shade, they tend to not bloom well. Inadequate moisture. Hydrangeas like moisture, and if you do try to grow them in a dry shade or dry morning shade, it's going to be you'll probably have to add more water. And the other big thing that happens if you fertilize, and I don't even fertilize my hydrangeas. The only thing I put on my hydrangeas is subsulfur to keep the pH down for those that I want to be blue. Now you can use aluminum sulfate to try to put on there. They really pour, but the biggest thing is you want to keep that pH down a little bit, about 6.5 or something like that. Okay. So if you do fertilize it, if everybody goes out in the spring and puts on a little bit of fertilizer, if you do very sparingly around your hydrangeas, because usually spring fertilizers have lots of nitrogen in them, and that nitrogen grows leaves. That's what you want in the spring, is you want the leaves, and then the other nutrients promote flower formation. Now you can get, we're not supposed to use brand names, but the blue stuff, crystals. You can get some that are formulated to encourage flowers. So there's the general purpose, and then there's the, all those different boxes of that particular brand are all formulated for a specific thing. Okay. I put in here this picture that I found. This is a good idea if you are really wanting to maximize everything on your microfile. You could put like some sort of a fenced area, a little wire cage, chicken wire, something like that, or more fencing wire, and then fill it with either mulch or leaves, a lot of leaves. That will help protect that through the winter, and particularly it's good to protect it through the spring when we get that up and down temperature. So, these are the diehard people that spend all their time worrying about their hydrangeas. Anyway, so hopefully I haven't gotten everybody too confused by what I've said. There's all kinds of literature. If you want to take a picture of this is the all my references that I used. I have not yet to see Dr. Durr's book. It's a whole book, nothing but hydrangeas. And they don't have it at the library.
I ordered it from Cleveland, so I think I might have it in my office.
Well. No, I tried to find it in all the all the libraries around the Cuyahoga County and Cuyahoga, or Cleveland and stuff like that. But anyway, it would be something to see and drool over. The thing is, there are so many varieties now. I have to do the Master Gardener plug. We do have a helpline, and Amy is in charge of the helpline, and she can tell you all about it. And there's an opportunity. There are people in the office on Tuesday morning from 9 o'clock to 11, and you can actually call, and there's a card over there that gives the phone number and everything, and they'll answer questions. They'll take questions about anything, any horticultural thing. But anyway, and if you don't happen to be available, or that time doesn't work for you, call and leave a voicemail. Make sure you leave your name and a phone number, and somebody from the helpline will get back to you. They're very busy right now, or can be very busy, and now that I've mentioned it to 100 other people, you could call them and say, why are my tomato plants getting yellow leaves on the bottom? Or whatever your problem is, horticulturally. Also, as far as identifying plants, there's apps, and this is the one that I had been using, iNaturalist. Take a picture, send it in, somebody gets back to you. iNaturalist now has an app, Seek, S-E-E-K, is the name of the app, and it's now taking advantage of AI, and it's really quick. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope we've helped you understand them a little bit, and I'll be glad to take some questions. Thank you. Okay, first,
You talk about that you prune in the spring, and I know I have to prune in the fall.
Yeah.
Because otherwise my husband would leave.
okay. One of those clean garden looks.
Anyways.
Scorched earth.
You use the same rules though about the third?
Yes.
third bud bench and take out the dead wood?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually, I guess, I just never do prune because I'm too busy doing other things, moving plants around and whatever. You probably wouldn't be able to detect the buds, I'm not sure. I just can't say. But be careful with your landscapers when they do their yard cleanup and the old cut it to the ground and get as much mulch down as you possibly can approach. It is helpful actually around here. There's the leaf litter around your plants in the spring. Leave it. Don't rake it all away as soon as the first nice day out, because that's where the pollinators are reproducing and you are giving them a place to do their thing. Okay. Now, so questions back here. Sir.
An area
Pardon?
a lot of conifers. I have an area that contains a lot of conifers.
Oh, you must be living in my neighborhood.
Pine, juniper, cut them out, so there's a lot of acidity in that soil. We've got some of them like microphilia and just put a new oak leaf in that area. Will they struggle with that pH?
Probably not. I don't know how, you'd have to actually do a soil test to see what the pH is. I've not heard of anybody having to add lime to get it back up a little bit.
I mean, there were so many in there that I've got a problem with roots.
Yeah, well, that's going to be the bigger problem. Yeah. But yeah, it probably would be, if now that you're wanting to replant things there, I would recommend you do a soil test. And you can get the soil test at the office, which is in the county office building in Painesville. And it has all the directions of how to do it. Okay? There was another question. Yes.
Can you move hydrangeas, and what's the best time of the year to do that?
Okay. Yes, you should be able to move hydrangeas. They're incredibly low, very shallow rooted. And I have never done this, but say you have a circle, of stems for a microphilia, you can actually cut it in two, just hack it in two, and now you have 2 plants or 4 plants or whatever. Now, like I said, I have not done that. Have you been successful? Oh, great. Yeah. Another thing about the hydrangeas that I didn't mention is sometimes they will just naturally air layer. I've had hydrangeas and all of a sudden they're looking very strange shape. It's because a branch is, low branch is laid on the ground sufficiently that it's started to root. Yeah, those are great because, you just cut that branch between the mother plant and the little baby over here, and they're going to be true, get somebody in the back?
Yes, I have a line like that, chemical, and it's exploding. And it's been like a bush, but you had said something about pruning it to a tree, which I'd like to.
I'm not sure. You could certainly try it. You would have to be very diligent about cutting off any of the sprouts that come along. Does it have a single leader?
Or branches to maybe create that tree?
Well, you would need to choose probably, if you wanted a tree, you're going to choose one branch, probably the most center one.
Correct.
I've never I buy tree, as they say, if you want a tree, buy a tree. Yeah. Likewise, they say that if you really want to buy a climbing hydrangea, it's probably wise to buy one that's a few years old, because it's just going to, It's just going to sit there for a while and just like, yeah. Okay, questions over here? Sir, ma'am.
Okay. Doesn't matter, I cut my hair short. At any rate, if you're going to a nursery to buy a hydrangea, what would be the things to look for when you're purchasing one?
The label. Read the whole label.
Make sure it has a good label?
Yes, yeah. And most of the hydrangeas now, because they're so popular, the picture I took, I didn't have the labels for the ones that I had planted years ago, but I went to Lowe's and I took the label off and put it down, took pictures and put the label back. The problem is you have to hope that the label that's on the plant is the right label. I've had some plants that I've bought that were going to be 4 feet tall that grew to 15. Lori knows that. Anyway, yeah. The labels, particularly hydrangeas, it's like a book practically handle, so. And also you can go to, I didn't get any of my information from it, but there's a hydrangea.com, probably run by proven winners. Yeah, this thing is a handout by proven winners. These are the ones they have licensed. And now some of them it would have, finding them would be difficult. Okay, somebody else had the, okay, yeah, I'll go.
Okay, so I think I have a big leaf hydrangea, and if I have no buds, like maybe 3 buds, so I'm gonna just cut back all that dead wood then in the fall?
No. If you think it's you leave that's the reason I would wait till spring.
Okay.
Because then you can really tell the difference between old wood and dead wood. Because if you find it, if you think it's and if you do cut it back all the way back, and it is a rebloomer, you will get later blooms, because the reblooms are coming on new wood. But if it starts blooming in June, you want the blooms in June, you want to be careful not to cut all the old wood out.
So if I wait till the spring, I can differentiate old versus new?
Yes.
Okay.
Or I think it's easier, yeah. Okay, there was some.
Here, one second, one may ask the question. Could you repeat the question?
Oh.
If you don't mind, so it gets
I
someone might-
forget that, thank you. Okay, you.
If you have a hydrangea that hasn't bloomed at all this year, which I do, should I prune it or just not do anything?
Well, I would, I would probably, I'm going to get, how long's that hydrangea been there?
About 3 years.
Oh, okay.
And it was cut down. That was the problem, I think, a couple of years ago. And it just, when I planted it, it had a bloom on it.
Was it a deep blue?
No, it was white.
Oh, okay.
And so for that year, it was okay. The next year, I can't remember if it bloomed at all, but this year, it's a nice size.
Yeah.
The leaves were very healthy.
Yes,
And
that was what
deep green, but no blooms, none.
Yeah.
What should I do? Prune it in the fall or spring, or do nothing with it?
Well, if you really want to try to make sure that it's going to bloom, I would fence it like I showed you that. Fence it, yeah. See this, whoops, wrong thing. She has a hydrangea that had a bloom when she planted it, and it hasn't bloomed since. No blooms. Okay. See, what I would do, you could prune it back a little bit, and you could, enough that you could put some sort of an enclosure around it and fill it with mulch or leaves. It probably will get a lot of leaves naturally, just because, but as you're raking your leaves, rather than just, putting them in the bags or whatever you have to do if you live in Menor, you just fill that full. and that will act as insulation.
So it needs more insulation?
It could be that it's just more sensitive to the cold, the variety, or it just, sometimes plants, there's just not very good plants. Yes. Carol.
Any suggestions for deer protection?
Big sense, big sense.
Okay, deer protection. I just re-listened to Eric's thing a couple of days ago, his recording, and he said, well, you could always get a lot of tulip bulbs and plant your tulip bulbs. Yeah, well, his point was they would prefer tulips. Yes.
Is there a better time of year to move the hydrangea? Spring, fall?
I would think I wouldn't move it now. It's always better to move things in the spring or fall.
Okay.
You probably, if you moved it in the spring, you may sacrifice some, the trauma of moving might affect your blooming.
Okay.
But on the other hand, moving an Annabelle in the spring would probably work fine, But they are very shallow rooted, so it's not difficult. In fact, is one of the questions that often comes up, some of our roots on the paniculata are coming up to the surface, and that's okay. I mean, they'll be all right. But do not use any Roundup, glyphosate, anything like that, because those roots will absorb it and toast your. Yes, ma'am.
I have a small twisted shop, and I'd love it to be blue, but it is 6 feet away from a fully matured, absolutely gorgeous Japanese maple. And I am afraid to use any type of acidifier to make it blue for hurting the Japanese maple. What do you think?
I don't think it would hurt it, but you're going to have a lot of trouble digging up because of the roots from the tree.
Oh, well, on the maple tree, or you mean the?
If you want to dig up your.
No, I just want it scattered around the twisted shop, which is 6 feet away from it, to get it blue, right?
Mhm.
But, and it's small, it isn't huge, so I can do the drip line real comfortably. I just don't want to hurt the maple tree by acidifying.
Oh, I misunderstood. Yeah. Okay. I am going to guess, but don't take this as absolutely true, that if it is a small area, if it's a big tree.
It is, it's about 20 feet.
Yeah, okay. You're probably going to be okay. Now, you may run into problems of too much shade eventually.
Well,
Yeah. I wouldn't purposely plant a hydrangea under a tree.
well, it's very lacy because of the way it's been grown.
Mhm.
And things that, the tree is the least of its matter, drops on shade. I have 40
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I planted 5 hydrangeas at the end of summer in about June, because I had old ones and they were like petered out, so I had them taken out. They're doing very well. And then about a month ago, the landscapers came down and put mulch down. And then I see they're starting to droop. And then we got hit by that storm, and I actually had to go take the jet plow. It was like Holly's Forester and Brown and deadheaded them. But do I just continue watering them and talking to them?
First of all, pull away the mulch from around it. Yeah. Mulch should not touch any plant that it's around. You should have a couple inches at least. And that's probably where you ran into it, and then who knows what the mulch was. But
It's very strong.
yeah. So I would definitely go out and dig all that mulch and make sure you've got some non-mulched area around it. Keep watering it, see what, yes.
I want to thank you. For 45 years, I've been doing everything wrong.
I know you don't, I, yeah.